What is amazing is that Amy and I just kicked this off completely unlive. So that is fun to start this out. Amy, are you still with me? Are you ready to do that again?
I'm still here and I haven't opened it. I've opened the tiniest ear of
Yeah.
whatever.
We were just about to go for it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. All right. Well, actually, that was the perfect place to start. So let me back up here for Amy and I. We've already started catalyzing this energy. Welcome to the people that are here. Welcome to the ultimate question. This is Amy. I'm Elayna. And this is the first of a series of live events or live, I don't know, live LinkedIn events, at least right now. And what we're doing is we're combining snail mail with live video. Yes, there's the snail mail. We're combining snail mail
Opened.
with live video to catalyze daringly real conversation. You might see me looking down a little bit. I'm slightly flustered by the fact that we just all did this. But here is the realness. Here is the underbelly of what that looks like, because Amy and I have no idea what is about to happen here, and that is it, because it's within this real conversation that we're creating right now that true insight emerges and bold ideas are able to be catalyzed forth. Those next steps start to materialize. Because what's worse than sitting there without knowing what those next steps are?
Mhm.
Despite the fact that that is incredibly important, right, Amy?
It is, and much more frequent than we would like.
Yes, yes. Um, so the way that this works is that Amy and I got on a call a few weeks ago. And from that conversation, I sat with that energy and formulated a question. I wrote that down on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope, and sent it to Amy. We just saw that a few seconds ago. There it is.
My actual draft.
Um, and she has not opened it yet. We
Nope,
almost did that.
almost did. It's
She
not.
does, but she doesn't know what the question is. And here we are kicking off our conversation with what's inside that envelope. But before we do that, I wanted to frame this conversation a little bit more for all of us. You can check out me and Amy's profiles for the typical introduction. I'm not going to do that right now. What I want you to know about me is that beyond business and even within business, I'm an artist. So I'm bringing an artist's curiosity to everything that I do. And I'm really, everything that I do is about creating an experience that allows you to get into the corners of your brain and into the depths of your heart to shake loose what's there, those bold ideas that you're maybe even a little bit afraid to acknowledge that you have. And what I truly believe is that for each of us, the future exists within us. And the real challenge is bridging that future into the now. And we each have a different calling to do that, a different place that we're coming from. Um, and the question, sorry, the ultimate question is of that. So while Amy has her question, this experience is for all of us. You may choose to ask yourself the same question that Amy has right here, or perhaps, well, not even or, rather, I'd like to invite you into the energy of the realness here and what might emerge from that. And at the end of this conversation, I'm going to invite you into um, a further opportunity to explore these ultimate questions. This is not a paid thing, but rather a way of gathering more questions to catalyze change forward. So without further ado, Amy, we are almost there. I am so excited, but I want to share the two things about Amy that are really important to know for this conversation. The first is that Amy is able to see between the things, all the things that are in front of us, that the confusion there. Amy is able to see between those things to see the thing. And it's that thing that allows her to facilitate radical growth with the people that she works with. And it's the kind of growth that is nearly impossible to create for yourself, and really hard to do when you're in one of those sticky kind of situations, right? So that's number one. Number two, this is just a really fun one, is that a few years ago, Red Bull reached out to Amy and said, "Hey, we love your vibe. You're exactly on brand. We want to shoot you. Will you do it?" And Amy, you said,
Well, yeah, that was one of the first ultimate questions, and that was a very easy yes, like this one.
I love
So,
that.
yes.
Yes. Well, I love that you said yes to this because not everybody would say yes to this, especially this being the first one to see what it's even about. So, without further ado, thank you all for being here. And here is Amy's ultimate question.
As we said, not opened, so I will open and it's a good bit. Okay, so the question is, can you guys see that? No, you cannot see that. You can see my chin. Um, what do you need to leave behind? Trying not to get that completely overexposed by my ring light and failing miserably. What do you need to leave behind? Well, that's a big question. It's got a one-word answer, and then it's also got a very long answer after that. And the first thing is well, the one-word answer, sorry, is everything.
Hmm.
Everything. I
Wow.
feel like not like everything, because I have a child and I'm not intending to leave her behind because that would be really bad. But everything. I feel like when you want to go to the next stage of anything, there's always some kind of a tithe to pay. And depending on how big a departure that is, or yeah, what's specifically going on in that situation, that the size of the tithe can vary. It can be a small thing like stopping believing some small bullshit thing that your parents told you or whatever that you've believed about yourself for a long time, or it can be a complete evolution of everything. And I feel like definitely for me anyway, particularly the last 3 months, probably beyond that, the last 6 months. And anybody who's watching this, I don't know who's watching this because I can't see anything, but anybody who knows me who's watching this will I'm assuming completely attest to the fact that that is the complete truth. That yeah, everything.
Yeah. Wow. Where will you start?
Um, it's already started in a way because it's yeah, it is honestly it is everything. Um, it's everything, and well, it's not everything because, like I said, I have a 2.5-year-old and I'm not leaving her behind. There are certain parts of myself that I won't leave behind, but it's just like you mentioned before that there are gaps in between things,
Yeah.
and sometimes, or oftentimes, particularly when you're somebody like me who wants to grow all the time for better or for worse, and there are times when I berate myself for that and I think, shit, why can't I just be happy with everything as it is and just stay where I am like a normal person? Which I imagine most people listening today probably also feel like that because you probably wouldn't be interested in something like this if you didn't. But you get that itch almost, you get that feeling, and it's just like, yeah, it's time to move now. And
Yeah.
not even, I don't necessarily even mean like move countries. I've never been like a nomadic person. I've lived where I live for almost 10 years, not in the house, but in the city. And but you just almost you get this feeling where you need to depart from everything. It's like completely new station.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Part of what I was feeling within that was the definition of everything and the idea of saying everything and then realizing a little bit more like you're not going to leave your daughter behind.
Mhm.
So I'd be curious to look at everything and what that starts to mean. I've never considered looking at the definition of everything because it seems to mean everything.
Nor have I, but I'm like a massive definitions person. I actually put up a thing on Instagram yesterday about that, about the definition of aggression. And just as like an aside, this is kind of a weird experience for me because I'm used to being like the facilitator of these sorts of things and like leading the way, and it's a bit weird to like be led in that sense. I kind of want to look at the definition of everything. Can I do that?
Yeah, why not? This is
Wow.
real, right? Isn't that
Let's
real?
do that. Okay, let's have a look because I think definitions are important, even if it's just as a starting point, rather than like something you have to stick to. So, okay, this is actually really helpful, obviously. So it says, this one says the current situation, life in general.
Oh,
There's another one that says every single thing or every particular of an aggregate or total. And another one that says all that exists. So, I mean, it's not the last one because I'm
yeah.
not going to leave all that exists. I would say it's probably more like the first one, the current situation or life in
Hmm.
general.
Hmm.
Mm. So in a way, everything's not everything.
Yeah, that's actually a really surprising definition. I was really thinking
Yeah.
that it was only three. The idea that everything is the current situation, although that now that I'm thinking about it more, that makes sense in the idea that we only really know how to experience everything within the current situation.
Mm.
But what we're creating here is much more than that. It's
Mm.
of bringing these things that exist within us to the forefront in a very different way. And so
Mm.
much of that is through conversation and through language. I find it endlessly fascinating that we can all feel the feeling that we have within us, that feeling, that drive. And yet, in order to really bring that out into the world, we have to structure it in some way with language, which is so much of what this conversation is.
Mm.
So, when you think about the current situation and the situation that you're stepping into, what are you stepping into?
I don't know yet, is the short answer.
Mm,
Um, do we ever know, truly? I mean, you can think about it and you can write goals down and you can imagine and all of that. You can visualize and things like that. And I think that's very helpful and very valuable. Um, but you never truly know, I don't think. And I feel like each time you go into that process, it becomes a new iteration anyway.
yeah.
Um, I have some skepticism about things like visualization, which not entirely chuffed to admit, I'm gonna be honest, because there's lots of evidence about it and stuff, but I'm just gonna be honest that I have a bit of skepticism about it. But then each time, I do still do it and I kind of challenge myself on that skepticism. But each time I would go into that place, I would see something slightly different. I would never know exactly what the thing was going to look like. So I don't know exactly what it's going to be. What I do know is that in order to get there, I have to be not completely different, but a lot of things about me need to be completely different because I do believe that what we have created, whether that's consciously or unconsciously, or a combination of both, of course. And what was the other thing I was going to say that I do know? Can't remember, so maybe I don't know it. Maybe it's just that I'm gonna have to be completely different on the other side. So everything within me, so the current situation within me, life in general, business as usual within me, whether that's, the little shitty habits you have or the things you think or um even like practical shit, those things all have to be different because if everything you do adds up to a certain result and that result isn't working, I've remembered the thing. The thing is that I've really realized over the past couple of weeks that I've been a lot more subjected to external influences than I thought I was,
Hmm.
which is kind of a weird realization for somebody who's very independent and thinks of themselves as quite independent thinking. So a thing about everything that have to be different is that it needs to be my everything rather than somebody else's everything or a combination of people more realistically's everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Starting with my everything. That's a really solid foundation, especially going back to how you began to answer that question of saying you don't know what you're stepping into. And I want to create all the space in the world for that not knowing because we live in a society that values knowing over everything else. And the power of this space, the power of us all being here together right now, and beyond that, there is the question signifies a non-knowing.
Mm.
And I think there are so many more of us that are tapping into this idea that the question is the answer. I mean, honestly, the answer is so boring unless we feel it, right?
Yes,
You know, I want to
completely.
be able to I want to be able to experience whatever answer I'm being led towards. Uh, and if I can't experience that, then it's not my answer.
Mm. No, I agree that the question is the answer, at least in some facet. And the question is the way, you
Mhm.
know. So, I'm prepared to say, I kind of want to say we don't know each other that well, but I also feel like we do because of the level at which people like you and I will go in at. We have not been in each other's lives for a very long time, but I feel like we know a lot about each other through that time. Time is like a weird concept, isn't it anyway? Um, but I called you on Saturday and I was really upset about something as part of this whole transition process of, what do you need to leave behind? And whereas I think a lot of people's default position in that situation is to offer a load of advice and say, everything's going to be fine and that has value for sure. But you just really asked me questions.
Mm,
And through the asking of the questions, that made me able to release the need to know in that moment
mm.
the answer or whatever, or wasn't necessarily even looking for an answer, but just like to know something. Um, and like to be able to enter that what I like to call like a liminal space or like a void space and just be in that place of not knowing and to find some way moment to moment of being okay with that.
Yeah.
That's the power of the question.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for that reflection because we don't know each other very well, and it's not always clear how we're being received. And it wasn't like it's also not about us. So there is that
Mm,
space that we play together in. And I one of my favorite things about the ultimate question that I really sat with as I was figuring out the naming of this, because it just came to me right away.
mm,
I I don't really know where, but it made me really uncomfortable to think that I could know the ultimate question. I mean,
yeah.
that is really saying something. And what what I leaned into from that was the idea that when we're truly asking a question, what are we doing? We're following the energy that is in the space and we're structuring that with a language or with language that has a question mark at the end of it. I think
Mm,
that if we're just there can be the reflection too. I don't want to say that the only way to encapsulate the energy is through a question, but that is a
mm,
really powerful way of capturing the energy. So for all of us, so many of us are coaches or leaders, people who are really tapping into the energy around them and having big questions about what to do next. I invite us to explore what the ultimate question is, because there's no right or wrong. And frankly, the ultimate question only exists within that moment, which is also the interesting part about the snail mail, too. It's like, was the question going to land in this situation, or was it of what was back there, and what does that mean? So there's that space here that we're exploring too.
yeah, that was a risk.
Yeah, it was like a kind of a
Yeah,
yeah.
big risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially at the time, we barely knew each other at all. It's really funny in the
Yeah,
last 3, 4 weeks, we have gotten to know each other in a different way, but
yeah,
I've always kept the question secret.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
And it's still relevant.
But I wanted to ask you, Amy, thinking about what you do for your clients, and I love how you framed that to me, that you see the thing between the things. Because I think on one hand, we could say that that is like really not clear, but I think that we can all feel what you're saying. And I love that aspect of it. So I'm curious, in this space that you're in right now,
Mm.
is there something that you're seeing between the things?
Mm. So I think contextually around that, because I've done a lot of things in, I'm 33, so relatively short life. And I'm always trying to draw the thread between them to kind of make it make sense for myself, really. And so I'm like gathering information all the time on what it is that I'm doing that is working, so I can do more of that thing. And that is the thing. So I started off doing that in like commercial insurance with tricky claims that were kind of screwed from the start, except they weren't, because there was always the thing. There was always a thing that people who had loads of education, experience, whatever, would miss,
Mm,
and somehow I could see it, and I'd be like, okay, that's the thing, and then they would get dealt with, and it'd be fine. And then to the gym, people with big injuries being told by physios and stuff they were never gonna do X, Y, Z again, but there was always a thing, and it was always over here. It was never in the place that the injury was, never ever. But then I could see that. And then the same what we do now in terms of a business context, it is people come to it with certain assumptions that if it's business, it means this is happening or this is happening, this happening. And sometimes you're right, of course you are. But would you rather not have the whole truth rather than a
mm,
half truth? Because if you get a half truth, you're going to get a half result. You're going to get half evolution, which I think is never desirable. So the thing between the thing for me now, it's kind of a whole nother level of that. Because then it's like you're seeing for yourself, which we acknowledged at the start
mm,
is the hard thing. Um, uh, so the thing between the thing, I think it's self-worth. I think
mm,
self-worth is everything. I think the stuff you have around you is generally a pretty high reflection of your self-worth. And if you're doing the work in a variety of different contexts, then your self-worth should evolve as you excavate, if you will. And you reach this point where you're just like, I don't feel at home in this because this reflects an old container of self-worth.
mm.
And at that point, we have several choices. You can accept it and be really uncomfortable in a new way, which may be good because then you can be like, oh, I feel like I'm better than all this stuff. And you can kind of get the human sort of thing off that. Or you can start to like poke around and test everything around you and see if it's willing to come on the journey with you, which generally, for better or for worse, I'll do the second one. And at that point, the people involved can choose to actually say, yeah, I'm going to come with you to the next place, whatever that is, um, or they cannot. And that's the thing.
Yeah, yeah. I love how you talked about that being a container. So often we think about containers as a limited space that we have to stay within, but we always have a choice of how we create those walls. And and the other thing that I want to tie back to what you're saying is also the idea that if it's business, then it's XYZ. And so I invite all of us into that dot dot dot, because how many of us are here right now because of that statement? If it's business, then it must be this. If that's what you're trying to do, then it must be this. And this ultimatum that we are led to believe that we need to strive for or strategize around. And so, Amy, what you're offering us into is a look at the container that we've possibly inadvertently created around us.
That's why I'm very wary of coaching.
Hmm.
And I'm very, very particular about who I work with in that environment now, because I feel like a lot of people have got very, very preconceived ideas about what should be going down in a certain circumstance. And if you or your situation doesn't fit those preconceived ideas, you can very easily leave that situation feeling broken or without really any kind of resolution that you were seeking. So I think it's so important to find people with that same sort of expansive world view or life view as you do. Um, and I agree, actually, I'd never thought about that before in the sense of a container. Like Tell you what, I'm thinking about it now, actually. When I think of containers, I think of things to keep things safe a lot of the time,
Mm, yeah.
which is funny because a lot of my life I haven't felt safe. Most of my life I haven't felt safe is the honest answer. So I've sought to kind of create that safety for myself, for better or for worse. And sometimes that's worked and sometimes that hasn't. But I feel like at this iteration of me, um, I feel like there's a container out there that can allow enough space for me to do the stuff because I'm never going to stop pushing. I'm never going to just like sit still and be like, yeah, done now, thanks, bye.
Yeah.
Even on like 90, if I get, the privilege of getting to that age. Um, but that that container can exist and also be safe. That's what I'm looking for.
Mm, yeah. I you just said that's what I'm looking for. And I'm feeling that there's also a creation in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Yes.
I mean, it's interesting, right? It's both in the way that there's that seeking and then there's the creating. Um, and I really think about it as being both the internal and the external, and the idea that we need to build what is within this container,
Yeah.
but we also need to step out and look at how that translates into the outer world. And we can talk
Mhm.
about this in any business sense, in any relationship sense, because unless you are a hermit out in the middle of the forest, you have to have that translation. You have to have your finger on it, your pulse on it. And the more I'm hesitating because I don't want to say this, but the more success that we have, and I don't want to say success because we really need to define what that means, but the more that we're able to connect powerfully, to serve powerfully, so that it's completely undeniable why we're here, that comes from being an excellent translator. And also the mistakes and the screwing up. When we think about translation and we think about language and how much we have to go out into the world and what it looks like when we're learning, and that can be learning around marketing, that can be learning around how a new offer is received, or how we're bringing on a new team member. There are all these different levels of learning that we need to be clear where we're at in the process. And so when we think about language, I don't know if you've had a lot of experience learning languages. I hadn't until I was in Japan. Have you had uh, some?
I wouldn't say a lot. I can speak pretty good French and some German.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, you're from the UK. As an American, I didn't know anything about anything for a very long time. But I remember that feeling of how awkward it feels in your mouth to say these new sounds. And I still have this in German. But it's so fascinating the first time that those awkward sounds come out of your mouth, to order a cup of coffee or whatever, and to then have that realization kick back to you of like, oh, these are awkward sounds to me, but this resonates and creates this connection in this world around me. And I think that is a really powerful thing for us to touch into when we're thinking about what we're trying to create in the world. And
Mm.
yeah, that container, bringing it full circle back to that container, um, having the internal and the external play there to truly build that bridge between ourselves and the people who need us most.
Mm. It's a funny analogy because I had a boyfriend for a few years that was a translator, and I remember him being up through the night several times, like poring over these very small bits of
Mhm.
minutiae, because he did French and Spanish, and obviously there's a reasonable amount of crossover between them. But if there's like one word in a particular, like I used to do like manufacturing manuals and things like that, real technical stuff, not just literature. And if you got it, the conjugation slightly wrong, you could literally just screw an entire thing. And it kind of brings me back to what you're saying, really, in the sense of you get what you ask for.
Mm.
And if you're not able to accept the thing that you are and the thing that you're here to do, then it's very, very difficult, I'd say impossible really actually to communicate that outside of yourself. So then you start communicating all these like weird bastardized things, and then the results you get are weird and bastardized. So you don't get what you want. And that starts with you.
Yeah. And I mean, I think all of those things, and I think you agree with me on this too, but tell me if I'm wrong on that, that all of those things are important in terms of processing forward and actually creating what we want. Um, I think the process of that, it is a lifetime of uncovering what we truly desire, I believe. That's why I've always had a very hard time with, so often when you work with business coaches, or it doesn't even have to be coaches, but this question of like, well, what do you want? What are you really going for? What is that
Yeah.
vision? For that question to sit at the beginning of a conversation, when I think it's one of the most difficult questions to answer. And I also believe that it is impossible to like, hold on, let me actually flip that. We know what to desire based on what is already in us. And
Hmm.
so there's an expansion that has to happen. And this isn't a bad thing. Like, it's really amazing how you can figure out how to desire even when you haven't actually had that thing. But there's also a risk of like, um, you want the Porsche, you want the house. Well, we were exposed to thinking that that is success, and to thinking that that's what we should desire. So because of that exposure, we can get caught up and confused. And so then shifting back to what we already know to want, and how they can be completely disjointed. I'm trying to come up with an example of that right now, because somehow when I was 22, I knew that I wanted to leave the States. How did I know that? I'd never been outside the country before. And when I was in high school, I didn't even want to spend the night at a friend's house. So how did I know to desire that? But there is something that was knocking on my door that was already existing within me. And I think that so much of it's not just desire, but ideas work that way as well. That this idea that you don't know how to language, you don't have the language for it yet, but you have the idea, you have the energy, you're connecting with people on it already. But you don't really even know how to imagine it fully. That is of that same sense, that that idea is of the future. It is in you. And again, it's
Mm.
about that translation of bringing it forth.
Yeah, I feel like there's a big piece there in terms of like the knowing of the body, the knowing
Mm,
of the soul, if you want to go that way. And then obviously you've got the overlay of knowing of experience and then knowing of seeing stuff. And I would say that they're kind of a hierarchical value to each other, that knowing of the body and the soul have a much deeper, stronger power and should have much, much more respect than, like you say, the shit you see on social media or whatever, which I still think is a valuable desire. Doesn't necessarily mean you should set your life on fire for it. It requires some discernment. But um, I feel like in a way we're kind of always in pursuit of finding that, not the end version, but like I'm going to say the end version for sense of like clarity, the end version of ourselves and like the greatest expression of ourselves.
mhm.
Um, and like with the Porsche example, there's this Lamborghini. I can't remember what it's called. I can never remember. You know, there's like a word that you can never remember, no matter how many times someone tells you, you can't remember it. I'm like, anyway, it's the Batmobile car in the most recent in the Christopher Nolan ones, because I feel like that's me in a car. And I bought behind me, I bought that bike because that bike, you can't see it very well because the wall's black and the bike's black, but that bike for me is like the bike version of the Batmobile car. And
Mm,
that is me in a bike. And I'm just like, it was a shitload of money. I didn't know how I was going to figure it out at the time, but I was like, that thing is me in a bike. And I know that I'm going to be able to become more me by being in interaction with that thing. That's
yeah.
why the thing's important.
Yeah. I love that you could recognize that.
Really a bit weird, but
Well,
Good.
I think that this is it, right? It's like we have this feeling of it. How can we look to understand that outside of ourselves too? And so as we're nearing towards a close, I want to offer that as a question for all of us to take forth of what is something outside of yourself that you can see, touch, feel, experience that is so of you, that really
Mm.
encapsulates you? Because these are the tiny little questions that get into us in different ways than the question of what do you desire does. Um, how about you, Amy? Do you have anything that you would like to leave here, an insight or a question? Um, yeah.
Gosh, yeah. Well, before I say that, I just want to say that I just suddenly realized in that moment that the month that Red Bull called me was the month I found that bike.
Dang.
So that's very interesting. It was April 2019. April is always a big month for me in that kind of world. The thing that I would want to leave, I don't know. I guess the insight for me is try not to be scared of the question. Because I mean, no matter how I may seem, and I'm aware that I have no idea who's here, by the way, because I can't say anything of the audience, but I'm aware that there may be people here who know me better than others. I am a very kind of blunt, black and white person, but at the same time, that that question is scary to me. I'm scared of saying things that people who I don't want to see this may hear, or I'm scared of saying the wrong thing or whatever. But I feel like if you kind of not feel the fear and do it anyway, because that's really cringe, but like, but like, you have to, I guess you have to just start each day and know at some point in that day that you're going to be afraid. And that might be like a little bit of a fear, like, oh, somebody nearly hit you on the road or that kind of thing, which it feels weird that I said that that's a little bit of a fear because that's quite serious. But for me, that is a little bit of a fear because like the biggest fear is like kind of existential annihilation through everything you know about yourself or you think you know about yourself not being true.
Yeah.
So just know that today you'll be scared and today you will also not be scared and then that'll
Yeah.
be okay.
Well, that's one thing I've learned from you too, because when we started to get to know each other, it was like this. I was seeing you on LinkedIn. It wasn't anything more than that. And I could sense that you had this very strong presence in you. And then as soon as we had a conversation and the depth that we went in those 30 minutes, and then the LinkedIn Live that I saw, I was at the beginning of the year, I think with David
Oh
McQuaid.
yeah, with David, yeah, yeah.
It was so interesting to see how both of those things existed within you, the bluntness and the willing to follow the question and the exploration. And I think that so often we don't see them as being able to coexist.
Hmm.
And so I'm so honored and appreciative of you being here in this space with us, with me, to help to kick this idea off. Because also this idea has been in me for a really long time. I've played it out in different ways, in more of like the artist sense, with snail mail, with the
Yeah.
questions. Story for another day. But when I told you about this a few weeks ago, I was telling you, saying, I don't really know if this is viable. I don't really know what space this exists in. And you were the one who coined the phrase that I'm reading it right off the screen right now, at a time when surface level BS runs miles deep. That's what you said to me. And I was like, shoot, that's it. That is why this matters, because we need the depth and the daringness of this conversation. So thank you. I'm going to thank you again because we've got to, well, shoot, we got a little bit late start. So I'm going to keep us pretty close to the 2:45, but I want to invite everybody into continuing this experience. And what I've done is, well, actually, the way that we're going to do that is that I want to ask everybody who's here watching live or the replay I want to ask you, what is your ultimate question? And what I've done is I've created a space where we can uh, it's essentially just a form where you can go in and you can leave your question there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile all of those questions and I'm going to share them back with you in the next few days. I even went as far to think of like, should I share them snail mail to everybody? That might be a little bit more that I can bite off right now. But before I drop that link in, I want to showcase again what the ultimate question means, because it is kind of a big ask. And you might be wondering, well, how do I know if it's ultimate? Can I do that? Because that's sure as hell what I was thinking. And so, what I want you to do, whether that's right now or in a few days, um, feel into that energy, whatever energy it is, and lean into it with curiosity. What question comes up? That question can be for you specifically, or it can be a question that you would ask others, or perhaps maybe even a specific person. But I am very curious to see how we can build this compilation of questions, because again, it is the questions that propel us forward. They are the beginning to any answer, and in so many ways, they are the answers. So I'm going to drop that in here right now. Let me get. Hopefully I can figure out how to get back. There's so many things going on my screen right now. There we go. Dropping that in. So that brings us to a close. And Amy, I want to thank you again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing so openly. You've definitely inspired me, especially with that last insight there. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's here with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, thank you guys for coming. Very cool.
Yeah, thank you.